Okay, I'm going to get us started right on time here. So, good morning, everyone, or afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from. I'm excited to have you all here today to talk about creating a kin first child welfare system and how we can open doors and remove barriers. My name is Katie Amelsey. I'm a National Child Welfare Advisor with Raise the Future, representing the National Center for Diligent Recruitment. And today I am joined by Allie Caliendo of Foster Kinship, as well as Dawn Barton from South Carolina Department of Social Services. Allie is here with us live. Dawn unfortunately couldn't be with us live today here, but we will still get an opportunity to hear from her in a little bit. Here at the National Center for Diligent Recruitment, our goals are to really work to increase the capacity of states, tribes, and territories around diligent recruitment efforts. So that includes recruitment, support, and retention for our kinship, foster, and adoptive families who can really meet the needs of our kids that are experiencing foster care. We provide on-site technical assistance that does tailored support around diligent recruitment planning. And we also provide resources and work to develop effective models of diligent recruitment that are based in research and work to further the evidence base of family finding, relative outreach, reunion support, and intensive recruitment and retention services. So that's a little bit about us here at the National Center for Diligent Recruitment. Before we jump in, just a couple of housekeeping details. This webinar will be recorded and shared with you in a post-webinar email. So in that email, you will receive the slides from today, the recording from today, as well as a survey. And I just want to thank everyone in advance for completing that survey. It's really important for us to get your feedback so that we can make sure that we are providing the most relevant and helpful resources to support you all in your diligent recruitment work. And then throughout the webinar, please feel free to ask questions and engage with each other in the chat. There will be some time at the end for question and answer. So if we don't get to questions along the way, then we'll come back to them at the end. So today we're going to talk about the importance of prioritizing kinship care, why that's important, the barriers that some of our kinship caregivers might face, and some different strategies and tools to support kinship caregivers through those potential barriers. And then we're going to talk about a specific evidence-based model that is used to support kinship caregivers, and that is Foster Kinship's Navigator model. We're going to hear directly from Foster Kinship about this model, as well as from South Carolina's Department of Social Services about how this model is currently being implemented in South Carolina. To ground us all in a common definition of what kinship care is for the purposes of this conversation today, kinship care is when relatives or fictive kin are providing care for children and youth who are experiencing foster care. And when we're talking about fictive kin, I'm talking about really anyone that is within that child or that family's extended social network. So, and is not related to the child by blood, marriage, or adoption. So that could be anyone from a family friend, a neighbor, a teacher, a mentor, the kid's school bus driver or crossing guard, the kids' best friends, parents. I really encourage you all to look at your policies and procedures to think about how you can think expansively when you are looking at who you are considering and exploring as fictive kin for our kids that are in care. We recognize that there is a lot of experience and a lot of expertise in this shared virtual space today. So there are going to be a couple of opportunities where I want to hear from you and see where you're at with things. So this is the first poll that we have for today. So if you could take a moment to scan this QR code, and the link will also be dropped in the chat. So whichever is easier for you, whether you want to go to the link or scan the QR code, I'll give you a minute to get there. I'm going to go to the next one. The QR code is still in the corner here if you didn't have a chance to get it yet, but looks like we have some responses coming in already here. So we've got family connection, stability, family connection, collaboration, normalcy, familiar faces. I like that one. Reducing trauma, peer relationships, keeping kids with family, normalcy, love. The ones that you see bigger here are the ones that multiple people have said. So you can see that there's some commonalities here in the stability, culture, community, comfort, identity, belonging. Fantastic. So keep those coming in if you haven't quite finished up. That's great. They'll all get added to this Mentimeter poll. Some of the benefits that I saw in this that I want to specifically highlight are the things that we're seeing more and more when we are looking at our data and research. So studies are showing more and more that when we compare youth who are experiencing foster care, who are living with relatives, compared to those who are living with non-relatives, those kids who are living with their relatives and fictive kin are faring in all of the areas that you see here. So they are doing better in school. Their mental and behavioral health outcomes are stronger. They're feeling stronger ties to their identity, belonging, and that family connection, like a lot of people mentioned on the last screen. And then also their permanency and placement stability outcomes are showing stronger in this area as well. So we have another poll here. We talked about why it's important to make this shift to a kin first child welfare system, but that's not to say that there won't be challenges along the way. So I'd like for us to talk together about some of those challenges and what that might look like. So this is a different QR code and a separate link. So I will give you another moment to get here. One so we can see things as they're coming in here. Financial challenges, training, background checks, paperwork. We know that can be pretty extensive. Family conflict, distance, especially when it's across state lines or even country lines. That can be certainly something to work through there. Age, lack of resources, space, criminal histories, boundaries, fear, stigmas, housing. Yep, looks like finances and that financial piece is a big one there. You can see that's big. So a lot of people are saying that. Again, keep those responses rolling in if you haven't quite finished up there, but these are really great examples and a lot of the ones that we're going to be touching on today as well. It's really important for us to be able to think about and think ahead about some of these barriers that our relatives and fictive kin might be facing so that we can do what we have control over on our end to try to open these doors and remove these barriers for our kinship caregivers. So these are the barriers and challenges that we're going to talk through a little bit more broadly here. We're going to talk through what these barriers might look like for our kinship caregivers and then some different strategies and tools that we can use to try to address those and help support our kinship caregivers to get through some of these challenges. So finances, that was the biggest one that we saw in that category. So that's definitely a big one when we're looking at how to support our kinship caregivers and some of the things that might come up as barriers and challenges here. When we're looking at finances and housing and space and childcare and just overall support, it's really important that we ground ourselves in the understanding that our kinship caregivers are very often coming into these circumstances unexpectedly. So they're not having a lot of time ahead of time to prepare mentally or physically to have another child come into their care. And when we look at that in comparison to our more traditional foster care programming, there is more time to have training and set up their house and do some of those things beforehand. Whereas for our kinship caregivers, a lot of this is happening all at the same time. And so there are going to be a lot of questions that they're going to ask themselves and that they're going to ask us. And it's important that when we're getting these questions and working through these things, we're really seeing these as opportunities to partner with family members and fictive kin to see how we can make these things work, and that we're not seeing them as immediate reasons to not move forward with consideration. So some of the things that people might ask themselves is, like we said, with the finances, can we afford to have another child come into our care? Is our house big enough to have another kid come in? And if not, can we afford to move into a bigger space? And if not, how can we safely make the space that we have work? Um, who's going to care for the child when I have to work and they're not in school? What are the different options around childcare and things like that to support around that? Is my car big enough to add another child into the car and get us all where we need to go? So again, these questions are going to come up, and it's important that we see them as opportunities and not barriers for consideration. So when we're looking at some different strategies and tools and mindsets that we can think about when we're looking at this, it's about looking at what we have within our agency and the different things that we can tap into when it comes to stipends or different financial assistance or financial support that can help with different childcare vouchers or things like that, but also tapping into different community organizations and seeing how we can create those partnerships and really work together with our communities to support our kinship caregivers as well. Furniture is a good example. I think when we talk about that space and trying to make things work how we can, a good example to think about is bunk beds. Can we help a family get some bunk beds so that if we have a room that might be a little bit smaller, can we put bunk beds in there so that we can optimize that space so that a kid can share a room with their cousin, things like that, of just getting creative in the things that we can do to try to support and really make these things work. Respite services and support systems, looking at what we have within our agencies, within community agencies on a formal level, and then also seeing how we can work with families around their informal support systems to talk about how can we tap into a neighbor or a friend or another family member or fictive kin that can also step in to help support when it comes to respite, planning respite ahead of time, or helping with the transportation issues and helping with getting kids to school or to extracurricular activities and things like that. So we make sure that our kids are still able to participate and be engaged in different normalcy activities and things like that. So really looking at what we can do to provide those formal services and then make sure that we're not creating barriers for families to also tap into their informal support systems to help with some of these things as well. It's important to remember that also a lot of these systems and programs can be in place in more of our formal foster care programs. But there is a really big gap when we're looking at the services and access to resources when families are licensed versus unlicensed. So you can see that depicted here in this graph. This graph looks at across the United States, the services that are provided to kinship caregivers, dependent on whether they are licensed or unlicensed. And so the light purple that you see there is the number of states in the United States that can provide resources in these different categories for kinship caregivers that are licensed. And then the dark purple is for kinship caregivers who are unlicensed. So you can see that across the board for all of these resources, that access is limited for our kinship caregivers who are unlicensed. And so that brings us to the importance of looking at, on our end of things, where are the barriers when we are looking at licensing? And so we know that there may be reasons that kinship caregivers choose not to become licensed, and there's respect in the choice around that. But we really want to make sure that we are looking inward and making sure that we are not the ones that are providing barriers that are making it more difficult for safe family members and fictive kin to be able to provide this care for their family. And so when we're looking at licensing regulations and making those kin specific and tailoring that to the experiences of our kinship caregivers and making sure that where we can, we are providing some exceptions and waivers for kin that looks at our policies and procedures and how we can look at the areas that we might be able to provide a little grace around that do not compromise safety. So safety is still a component here. We are going to want to make sure that our kids are going to be safe in all of the homes that they are living in, but where's the room there that we can prioritize having kids live with their family members and fictive kin while maintaining that safety, and where's that space, right? Are there different things when we're looking at um, for example, the number of bedrooms that are required in a room, or limited numbers of how many children can be in a home. Those are the type of things that when we look back at how can we optimize space with bunk beds and providing different ways to kind of work around some of these things to try to make it work for our kin providers and our kin caregivers. It's really important to think through what we can do to really try to make these things work, and that have that be our common goal in really trying to make things work. Customer service is one of the foundations of diligent recruitment. And so when we're thinking about our kinship caregivers and how we can provide that customer service, it's really about making sure that we are having that collaboration and that shared goal with our kinship caregivers to really try to make these things work. Good customer service is everybody's business in child welfare all across the board. It's a key foundation for achieving safety, permanency, and well-being outcomes for the children and youth being served. And so when we're looking at how to provide that effective communication, effective customer service, sorry about that, it's really about making sure that we are available, we're responsive, we're reliable, we're consistent, and that we are looking to provide a collaborative partnership with our kinship caregivers with a mutually invested goal of the family success. And all of this goes into just supporting our kids and youth that are in care, right? If we're doing all of these things, if we're supporting kinship caregivers, we're getting these kids in homes with their families and supporting that, then we're working towards the outcomes that we're looking for in placement stability and permanency for our kids in care. We recognize that this is a shift when we're talking about a kin first child welfare system. It's a shift from the norm and the way that things have been done for a really long time. And so that is going to take some time and effort when we're looking at our practices and our policies and making sure that our policies are translating into practice. So one of the things that we're looking at when we're thinking about this shift is working towards increasing the number of kids who are coming into care and joining family members or fictive kin right away as that first placement. And so when we're thinking about that, we can see how that's going to require a shift in resources, a shift in mindset, a shift in the way that we do things. And so when it comes to educating and training staff, it's really important that we are pausing and making sure that there is a common understanding of why we're making this shift and how we're going to make that shift, and that there's intentionality in making that shift. And so that might require us to look at how are we shifting roles, and what does that look like for our current staff? And do we need to increase staff? And do we have to look at our capacity and where things are at with that? Do we need to look at potentially outsourcing resources so that we can share some of that load and maybe have a community partner come in and work with our communities to do more of the family finding or outreach to relatives to share that load? It's really important as we're thinking through all of these things to remember that that agency and staff buy-in is what is ultimately going to make sure that our policies that are supporting this shift to a kin first system are actually happening in direct practice and translating into practice. When we are working with our family members and fictive kin, it's important to remember that our child welfare systems can be really complicated, and sometimes we forget how many acronyms we use and how complicated it can be sometimes. So it's really important when we're thinking about training and education for our family members and fictive kin that we are really slowing down when we're talking about how things are working and making sure that we are coming back and checking comprehension. And so that might look like sitting down with a grandmother who is a caregiver and talking through the permanency plan with her, or talking through what the court hearing next week is going to look like, and talking through the expectations that we have for them as a kinship caregiver, and making sure that it's really understood and that we're being really clear in our explanations and in our expectations. And so some of the best teachers and some of the best people for us to tap into when it comes to this education and training is their peers and people who have experienced it and who are currently experiencing it. So that might be tapping into kinship caregivers that can be champions or foster parent champions, things like that, to really help share that information from a place of experience, because we know that that can be always heard differently from that lived experience. We know that caregiver burnout is real. We know that kinship care can be really hard, and that the stress of all of this can lead to adverse impacts on how our kinship caregivers are able to function on a daily basis, right? So when we're looking at caregiver burnout, it can have adverse impacts on mental health, physical health, and just overall well-being. And we know that that can then lead to impacts on parenting capacities and can lead to blocked care and blocked parenting. And all of these things are going to have an impact on our kids and youth in care, and can lead to potentially disruptions in placement stability and permanency. So it's really important that we are proactive in trying to think about how can we prevent caregiver burnout instead of having to react to it. And so when we're thinking about some of the challenges and feelings that are specific to our kinship caregivers when it comes to burnout, it's also important to remember those additional feelings of guilt that can come from caring for a family member's child, and having to be, as a family member or a fictive kin, being the one who's having to set a lot of those boundaries with your family and with your support systems, and the different dynamics that can come into play with some of those things, and how isolating that can feel, and the challenges that can come with loyalties within the family and things like that, and the impact that that can really have on our kinship caregivers' own support system oftentimes. And then there's that obligation that can also feel a little bit stronger for our kinship caregivers when they're thinking about asking for help. Sometimes it can be a little bit harder for our kinship caregivers to ask for help because they feel like they need to be able to say, this is my family and I've got this. And so it's really important that we are, from the beginning, setting the expectation that we are not expecting our kinship caregivers to do this work alone, and that we need them to take care of themselves so that they can take care of these kids. And so talking about self-care and reminding them that nobody can pour from an empty cup. That's also true of us and all of us who are working with kinship caregivers, and making sure that we're taking care of ourselves so that we can provide that effective customer service and make sure that we are at our best for doing the support work as well. And then when we're looking at respite care support groups so that kinship caregivers can have shared experiences and work together through these shared experiences, mental health services for the whole family, recognizing the change in dynamics that's going to come for the entire family, and making sure that all of those needs are effectively addressed as well. And then back to that training and education, again, recognizing that this is going to look different for our kinship caregivers. And a lot of times they're going to be doing this training along the way when they already have kids that have come into their care. And so making sure that those trainings are kin specific and meeting those unique needs that our kinship caregivers are going to experience, and making sure they're still getting that trauma education and the tools and support that they're going to need to support our kids in care. So with that, I want to shift us into talking about a more specific tool and strategy to support our kinship caregivers. So I would like to introduce you all to Ali Caliendo. Ali and I are both out here in Las Vegas, so we've had the pleasure of being able to work together for several years now, and I have been able to see the incredible work that her and her agency has done to support the family members and fictive kin in our community. So I'm really excited that she's here to talk with you all today. And with that, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Katie, and thank you for setting the stage as to, the importance of kinship care in our child welfare system, but also some of the barriers and opportunities that we're facing now. Like Katie said, I'm Dr. Ali Caliendo, and for the last 15 years, I've really had the privilege of building foster kinship and helping Nevada and other states consider what it very practically means to create a kin first system, and that's through partnering with our evidence-based Navigator program. But I really want to start by grounding this conversation in sort of where the work started for me. More than 15 years ago, before I started foster kinship, I was actually doing direct services for children inside the child welfare system. And I witnessed firsthand a case that changed the trajectory of my career and my life. And it was four young children who had witnessed their mother's murder, and their father was incarcerated. So they ended up in Child Haven, which is our sort of group home for children who need foster placement. And a great aunt stepped up and took all four of these kids. She said yes without hesitation, and she took in four very traumatized siblings that needed a whole lot from her. And over time, I was working with the children. Over time, I saw the children begin to stabilize and they were healing through their connection to their family and their school and their church and all the parts of their family that was healthy and good. But I also saw the great aunt sort of unravel over time. As the children were getting better through her investment in them, she was getting more exhausted, isolated, overwhelmed, navigating a system that didn't recognize her needs. She needed someone to walk alongside her, and no one was walking alongside her. This was 2010, just to give you context and the timing. And in fact, eventually, when she did ask for help from the child welfare system, she just experienced barrier after barrier. She was finally told about licensing as a foster parent. There were many barriers getting through that process. And in fact, when they came out to do the home study, when they measured one of the bedrooms, they said it was too small. And so they denied her foster license. She then asked the child welfare system for $800 so that she could move into a larger home and get licensed and continue. And she was told, and I witnessed this, because you're asking for help financially, you can't do this. We're going to come and remove the children from you and place them in foster care. And that was the experience that really opened my eyes. One, kinship caregivers are this invisible backbone for our child welfare system. They step in during the most traumatic life parts of their child's life and also in the family system in that life. They're really stepping up and saying yes, but they're not getting support. And this was what changed my life. So, because I did rally friends and family at the time, we raised $800. We got her moved. We helped her finish the licensing process. She eventually adopted those children, but that switched my lens to what's going on with kids who are living in kinship care. And that's how foster kinship was born. Because even with my background and training, I saw how confusing, isolating, and even punitive at the time it was for this family to navigate systems that just weren't truly designed for kin. They weren't built around kin. So it's hard. And that's why there has to be a different way. So Foster Kinship is a Nevada-based nonprofit. We're a 501c3. We are statewide, and since 2011, we've helped more than 24,000 children in our state and their kinship families stabilize. We have our evidence-based navigator program, which I'll talk about, but we also provide kin-specific training. We do a lot of child and youth interventions, including respite care and youth support. And we have a program called Marcy's Heart, which is just a basic needs resource center. And it's really important to know that we are very close partners with all the child welfare agencies in Nevada and in all the states where we work. But we also serve any kinship family, which I'll talk about, because we know that even if kids start in foster care, oftentimes they may end up in kinship care outside the system. And it's important that we are able to stabilize families along that spectrum of options and not just say, oh, if you're not in foster care, you can't receive help. So while we work really closely with our child welfare agencies, we also work closely with all the other systems that support kin to make sure that no matter where a child falls on that spectrum, we're able to provide support. So my goal now is just to show you a bit about our navigator program, which is delivered through public-private partnerships quickly and really keep children with the people they know and love. So next slide, please. So as Katie said, when we talk about kinship care, we are really talking about a large system caring for children. Specifically for this conversation, I know many of you are in your child welfare agencies, and we're focused on that formal kinship care definition. But truly, there are so many children in kinship care, which is living with a relative or fictive kin in or out of the system. And they are doing amazing work. All these kids, whether they end up in foster care or they're in informal kinship care, they have similar needs. Even if they haven't entered the foster care system formally, most of these children have experienced this and trauma, abuse, neglect, parental substance misuse, mental health crises, parents are incarcerated, or there's domestic violence. The same drivers that bring children into foster care are the same ones that have children in kinship care in general. The big difference, of course, is what families have access to. So as Katie said, if you're in formal kinship care, those families could be licensed or unlicensed, and some states allow families to remain unlicensed. Some states have provisional licensing. So every state is a little bit different, but there is sort of a step into a formal licensed kinship care that we really encourage families to go to if that's an option. But of course, if they're not in the foster care system, that's not an option for them. So we really believe that a kin first system should be just prepared to recognize the reality of this back and forth child welfare involvement and acknowledge that families are both prevention from our traditional foster care system, but they're also an intervention for children who've experienced parental separation, abuse, neglect, and other trauma. And we need to support all of these kids. Next slide. So we know that kinship families step up in moments of crisis, that they're often doing so without support. And we know when kinship families are not able to access services, whether it be legal or financial, children can experience placement instability. And we know placement disruptions can increase. I'm sure you see it in your agencies and your systems. We know that kinship families may be more likely to parent in poverty and that long-term child well-being outcomes can decline. So because we know children in kinship care are facing similar challenges, but that their caregivers have, less support, less access to resources, that's where the gap is, and that's where navigation matters. And our program is not just a hotline, but is really a structured, proactive bridge, helping kinship families understand what's available, what's accurate to their situation, and then how to navigate those systems safely and with trust and without fear. A navigator program can reduce the friction that pushes kinship families into further crisis after placement. Next slide. So we know that one of the most protective factors for a child who cannot remain with their parent is staying connected to their family and to their community. But we also know that these caregivers are more likely to be older, single, on fixed incomes, and they're often placed in that unexpected parenting role overnight. And Katie mentioned they don't have the same, they didn't decide to become foster parents, go through a training, prepare their home, get new beds, get the car seats. They're getting that call in the middle of the night. They are saying yes out of love and loyalty to their family. And then they are dealing with kids in the home, big issues that are happening in their family, and, all of a sudden faced with this huge system involvement that they weren't necessarily expecting. So we believe a kin first system should really acknowledge that gap for caregivers. Their kinship caregivers are so different than our traditional foster parents. And I say this as a former foster parent myself. I mean, we had a lot of time to prepare and we're ready for that first child. These kinship families their life is changing overnight. So the philosophical foundation of the navigator model is to address that gap. Next slide. So our model is built really around providing accurate information at the right time so that families can make the best decision for themselves. So we offer information, referrals, and peer support in ways that really feel safe for families. We know there's a lot of stigma and a lot of shame that kinship families may experience because they're not just dealing with what the child is going through, but with perhaps what their son or daughter is experiencing, their, sister or brother, if they're an aunt, or an uncle. And so there's a lot going on there. We can offer this without stigma and build trust because we are offering it through sort of a peer professional model. So we're a community-based organization. that hires our family advocates who there may be social workers or human service professionals who also have some lived experience in either kinship care, growing up in kinship care, foster or adoptive parents, something that provides, hey, I've been there, I know how you're feeling, and we can guide you because we've been there through some of the best options for you. Once we build that trust, we're connecting them to financial legal resources, to all the resources in the community that are available to them, to ongoing peer support. And we're doing active outreach to make sure that families who may be hidden know that there are resources that are safe and will help their families stabilize. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. Next slide, please. So our work is really guided by three goals, and that is we want kids to be in safe homes, we want kids to be in stable homes, and then ultimately we want to increase the well-being needs of children by making sure they're in very nurturing homes. So sort of like Maslow's hierarchy, we focus on safety first, meeting those immediate needs, food, diapers, safe sleep, crisis support, just getting that family what they need immediately. And then we really dig into stability. And we measure stability through legal capacity. Do they have the decision-making ability for these kids? Are they able to keep the kids safe? Are they able to make good decisions? Do they understand their situation with the child welfare system and whose role is what? And then financial sustainability is very important for families. And so we really focus on helping families access all of those resources that are available to them. And then finally, when families are stable and they're able to, put food on the table and make decisions for kids and kind of get through those initial moments, we really focus on increasing their nurturing parenting skills and connecting children to what they need to heal over the long term. So this sort of structure helps us respond quickly to crisis, meet those needs, then meet the next set of needs, and then really focus on building long-term resilience in families who have experienced generational cycles of abuse, neglect, and trauma. And the next slide, please. So, like I mentioned, we're going to measure our success in 4 domains. We look at legal capacity, financial sustainability. We look at parenting and child community connection. So this is all of the resources in that community that are available to that child and that caregiver, both on a parenting level and what those child needs are. And then we're providing a whole lot of caregiver emotional support because we do need families to know they are not alone, they are not unique. They are in a group of a lot of other caregivers who understand what they're going through, and there is support available. They don't have to feel isolated and exhausted alone. And then we meet those needs through 2 levels of our program. That's information referrals and support, and then case management. And this is where our practice model is very measurable because every case plan is going to be built around these 4 domains, and they are the drivers of stability, we believe, for kinship families. So next slide, please. So our information referral and support level is where all families start. All kinship families who use our model receive this level of service. So we are going to offer online guidance through what we call a resource locator tool. And this is a tool that allows us as family advocates or the caregiver themselves, if they so choose, to put in their zip code, their relationship to child welfare, their age, the age of the child, and a few other things that differentiate them. And it will provide them with accurate information based on their exact family type. We also have a helpline staffed by experienced family advocates, and we have a modality where they can come in office, we can go into homes, we can do things over the phone or remotely. We're offering a detailed intake and assessment. And the most important thing about this is it's a story-based intake that allows the caregiver to have space to feel supported and tell their story with a very compassionate and empathetic family advocate who's been in their shoes. But we're also assessing for the family type because we know, again, very simply, if a child is in foster care or in a family preservation situation, or perhaps they're in a private kinship arrangement, and some families have maybe all 3 of those in one family, the resources are different. So we need to make sure we know exactly how systems define that kinship family so that we can provide them accurate information. There's nothing more discouraging for a family than getting just maybe a huge packet of like, well, this may apply to you, figure it out yourself. or even wrong information. You have families who are told they can access SNAP benefits, but in fact they can't due to their household income. That's very discouraging. And when families are given incorrect information that sounds hopeful and then they're denied, we see an increase in disruption there. So the number one thing that we're doing at the beginning is listening to a story, providing space and emotional support, but also accurately assessing where a family is, how systems define them, and giving them real information to make better decisions. Next slide. And then many families are going to opt into case management, but not all. So if a family has received all the information at that information and support level that they need to make decisions and they can go out and do these things for themselves, they're absolutely free to do that. But many families will say, I would like some additional help getting this guardianship, or I don't want to go to the welfare office and do child-only TANF on my own. Can you help me with that? Absolutely. We're going to set between 1 and 4 goals for these families based on what they know they can access and then what they choose to do as a family. And based on those family-led goals in these 4 domains, we're going to assign a family advocate to walk alongside them and make sure they have everything that they need from start to finish. And by finish, we mean you've actually got money in your bank account. You actually are a licensed kinship caregiver now, or we got King Gap, or it's an adoption, or any sort of thing like that. We are not going to say goodbye until that goal is met, as long as the family wants to continue to work with us. So this is that peer professional model and case management as well. Next slide. So like I said, we can make goals in those 4 domains, and what it looks like most often are things in the legal realm and things in the financial realm. And we are just providing support along the way. Our family advocates are experts in resources in the system and out of the system, and we are going to make sure families access everything that is available to them based on their unique situation. Next slide. This is just an example, and I can get in the weeds all day long with this. So we know we'll have more opportunity to talk at later times. But for our model, because we can serve any family, if the family is inside the child welfare system, we're focusing on legal goals like licensed caregiver, kin gap, or public adoption, getting to that permanency. But if they're in family preservation or outside the system, we're looking at how do we get you legal custody, or when this case is over, this investigation is over, how do we make sure that you have legal guardianship so that you can continue to do the best thing for that child? So we're able to target our goals based on what the family needs. Next slide. But we're also, for our family connection goals and our emotional support, we know that families all need the same things. These kids have experienced similar things. Kinship family dynamics are similar. And so we are going to provide the same resources for these families based on what's available in the community and through the agencies. But all families need to be connected to everything and to feel supported. So that is key to meeting all of our goals. Next slide. And I've mentioned this several times, but our model really is designed to work with families who start in the foster care system. Perhaps they're unlicensed or have a provisional license, moving towards licensure. We have families who are in family preservation situations, and then we have families who end up perhaps, getting guardianship outside the system, or they stepped up completely outside the child welfare system, and they still need support to keep those children from entering foster care. We're going to provide support to any one of those families. Next slide. Okay, so our model outcomes is where we measure fidelity in all the sites where we work. So it's very simple. Of families who need legal capacity and choose to pursue that as a goal, 80% of families who needed legal capacity will have achieved it by the end. Same with financial stability. And then for our parenting and child community connection and emotional support goals, 90% of families who had a goal in that space will have increased their capacity in those spaces by the case end. And as long as we're within those ranges, we're meeting model fidelity. And when we meet model fidelity, next slide will show you our outcomes of our 2 external evaluations, which show that when we're able to get these outcomes, we're able to stabilize families. Next slide. So in our independent evaluations, we've had 2 studies that looked at families who used our model and families who did not, who were in our foster care system for 3 years, looking at every single kinship family in our system. Families who used our model were 3.4 times more likely to become licensed kinship foster parents, which we know is a very, very safe outcome for kids in foster care. Kinship foster care that is licensed research shows one of the safest placements for kids. They're 1.7 times more likely to receive a benefit outside the foster care system for those families who are not eligible for licensing, something called child-only TANF. And they're nearly 3 times less likely to experience placement disruption into traditional foster care, which, number one, stabilizes families. This is good for children, but it also saves our child welfare system quite a bit of money and hassle because we are placing with kin, we are stabilizing kin, and we are making sure that children stay with kin and achieve permanency or reunification within their family. And next slide. So this is, just want to close and just share just briefly my current story because I just believe this work just has to constantly be evolving, but also rooted in this deep listening. Last year, I became a kinship caregiver myself unexpectedly when my own family entered crisis. I'd already worked in this space for 14 years, but even with all my education and experience, navigating the system still felt very confusing and overwhelming, and I was just in crisis myself. And again, I just remember thinking, if it's still this hard for me, how much more important is it for us to constantly be looking at how to really hear the families in front of us and meet their need? So we just need to keep stepping up for kin. When they step up, we've got to step in for them. We love being part of a kin first system, and we look forward to partnering with anybody who's interested in learning more. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Allie. I appreciate all of your work out here and all of the incredible things that you're doing in our community and that it's spreading across the United States as well. So, like I said, Dawn unfortunately isn't able to be here with us live today, but I did have a conversation with her a couple of weeks ago, and so we have some clips from that we can listen to here. All right. Well, thank you, Dawn, for joining us today. We're sad not to be able to have you here with us on the live webinar, but thanks again for having this conversation so that everyone can still hear about how this program is working in South Carolina. So can you just go ahead and start with telling us a little bit about yourself and your agency?
Yes, so I'm Dawn Barton. I am the Deputy State Director of Child Welfare Services here in South Carolina. I have been with DSS in South Carolina for 27 years. So I always laugh and say, I guess I've grown up here. We have done a lot of innovative work here in South Carolina, really over the last, I would say, 10 years. And as it relates to kinship care, we really started enhancing that work back in, I guess, 2018. And we started really doing some policy work and some legislative work. We have always had the ability in our state to place with kin, but it wasn't until around 2018 when we really started to try to embed a kin first culture. You'll hear my folks in South Carolina mention kin first culture a lot because that is exactly what we wanted our agency to be really known for. If children had to be removed and separated from their families, then our first option should always be to try to work with those families to identify kin or fictive kin. And in our state, we do extend that kinship search to fictive kin. So even if you're not related by blood, marriage, or adoption, if you have an emotional connection to that child, you could be a coach, a pastor, a teacher. We extend that to those fictive kin options. Say that we know children do better when they're with people that they know. It's less traumatizing. It is oftentimes a more stable placement than a non-kin setting. And I think in general, their outcomes are much better. So one of the things that we started with was we actually have a kinship care council. So we started that council. There was another outside council that was our kinship advisory council. So we had an internal kinship council, and then we had another outside kinship council that was being driven by the Sisters of Charity, and it included lived experience and the policymakers and other individuals that were dedicated to supporting and advocating for kinship care across our state. And so that was one way that I think we chose to support kinship caregivers, was to have their voice at the table to help inform our legislative priorities, our policies, any sort of support services that they felt like were lacking. In addition to that, we were very lucky in that we had a provider in our state, down in our low country, that actually had a navigator program. So we had one navigator program that served a few counties in that particular region, not all counties, but that was sort of how we started like our navigation work and our support service work for families who had placement for kin. In addition to that, we did adopt the Caring for Your Own, which is a kinship specific training. One of the things that we started exploring was kinship navigation for our entire state. So we did start exploring primarily the evidence-based kinship navigator models, because we wanted to be able to update our 4E plan to be able to leverage the federal reimbursement for that work. Our General Assembly actually funded our navigator programs, so it allowed us to do that exploration. It allowed us to do some capacity building grants and move that work forward. One other thing I wanted to mention that we did really in pretty close proximity to each other is we so that we could be able to place children quickly with kin when they had to come into foster care. We did an emergency regulation back in 2018 so that we could do a provisional license. That was something that we didn't have the ability to do before then. And so that allowed us to place the child with the kinship caregiver with the background checks and the home assessment. And we could do that in the same day. And so that was great, because that meant that kids didn't have to necessarily come in, and then we take people through that whole licensing process and then place. We could actually place them, do the background checks, do the assessment. If all of that was fine, then we could place them. And then they actually started receiving a board payment the day we issued the provisional. So they were getting that financial compensation, which really a lot of our families really need to be able to support taking on an additional child or children into their home. The other thing that we did was we were able to get through legislatively our kin gap legislation. So that subsidized legal guardianship, SLG, also known as kin gap, almost a couple of years in at this point, and we've about doubled the number of children that have exited to permanency through SLG. So that's been another just wonderful thing that we've been able to do, so children don't linger into care. We know that lots of families, kinship families, they don't necessarily want their family members' rights to be terminated. That can be a very difficult thing for them to support, understandably, particularly if it's your son, your daughter, your grandchild, whatever the familial connection is, you don't want to necessarily sever that relationship. And so that has afforded us and allowed children to move towards permanency without having to terminate rights, and keeping that familial connection there if it's safe to do so, of course, for families. So we're very excited about that. We hope we can see that grow. We've got a process in place by which we staff constantly with our regions and our counties to see who might qualify and be in a position to exit to permanency in that way. And so that has really helped us, I think, maximize that program to the best of its ability.
That's great. I feel like that addresses so many of the shifts that need to happen in having a kin first system to be able to have that stuff from the beginning, right? When we're so used to having vetted foster parents that kids coming into care generally go to, that shift in resources and that different approach really is addressed in the way that you have shifted there. So that's incredible.
Yeah, we're very proud of how far we've come in our system. When we started the work back in 2018, we had oh my goodness, I think we had 5 licensed kinship caregivers. I mean, barely any. So we have come a very long way, and what I would say is in a very short time. And it really is, you have to embed in your day-to-day practice, like this is just the way we do the work. This is, you don't think about placing with anybody else but kin.
So can you talk with us a little bit about your collaboration specifically with foster kinship and how that process has looked in implementing the foster kinship navigator model into your agency?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, we got some funding, some state funding from our General Assembly to support the kinship navigator, building those in our state. And so our legislature has been just incredibly wonderful in supporting our kinship initiatives, and we honestly would not be as far as we are if we had not had all of that support, and of course all the people behind the scenes, right, like that came and present and gave testimony. Our kinship caregivers did that, our private providers did that, and partners in the work. And so we're so grateful to all of them, because we couldn't have done it by ourselves. But with those funds, we were able to begin exploring. So we did hire a part-time consultant that I worked with, that helped us to do the research. Again, we were mainly focused on those evidence-based programs, again, so that we could maximize the federal funding that could also be drawn down from using one of those models. And so in our exploration of foster kinship, we met with them a couple of times, and then we were able to actually travel out to see their center, and also in sort of real time see what an intake looked like for them, what that assessment looked like, learn what their services looked like and what they were, how they happened. And so that was a game changer, I think, for us, and sort of solidified that this model felt like the right model for South Carolina, because it doesn't require a private provider that is interested in doing that work. It doesn't require a ton of capacity, because so much of it can be done over the phone or virtually. Obviously, they have offices, and if somebody wants to come in person, they can do that. They were also very adaptable to, if for some reason they needed to go to the home to do that, on occasion they could, but the majority of the work happens by phone or virtually. And so, and then it's just, at that point, it's service connection and coordination. And so we really liked just the simplicity of the model. And so at that point, we decided we wanted to move forward. Allie and Leah were amazing to work with. And just really held our hands through the entire process. And so we were able to onboard them contractually. Obviously, it's their model. And so, there was a licensing fee, of course, to use their model, but they selected South Carolina and another state, so that they allowed two of us to do it. And so they came on site. We did capacity building grants. So we took some of the funds that we had gotten from our General Assembly for that particular work, and we issued capacity building grants. There was a system, right, that they use that had to be stood up with each of the providers so that they could track the data to make sure, their model fidelity was being met and followed. Once we got all of that off the ground, we went live, and I'll say one of the challenges, I think, in every system is getting the referrals to the provider. And so for our foster care population, it's an automatic referral. The case manager doesn't even have to think about it. So we use one of our reports, and we know who has come into care, who has been placed with a kinship caregiver from our placement tab in our SACWA system. We're sending that information over automatically and making those referrals automatically so that we can be sure that every child that's placed with a kinship caregiver is getting that referral over to that navigator program. So that's really how we worked alongside Allie and Leah. They were awesome and wonderful. They still have check-ins, with those navigator programs, and us as the child welfare agency to really, it's a CQI process to figure out like what's working well, what's bent, what do you need support with. And so they continue to stay involved with us along the way. So I think it certainly has, through the natural way of their assessment process, it identifies the needs sooner. So knowing what the needs of kinship caregivers are helps with stability in particular. Because if we're not identifying those needs early on, and then things start sort of bubbling up, it becomes a barrier to being able to stabilize that placement. So if the sooner you know and can assess what the caregiver needs are, or even the child's needs, right? Like that might come up too from the caregiver. It certainly helps with stabilizing and making that placement successful. So when you look at our data, our kinship placements, our children who are placed with kinship caregivers overall are more stable than those in non-kin placement settings. We're seeing better outcomes with placement stability because they have somebody they have those navigator programs are helping to navigate and advocate for their needs.
What advice would you give to other child welfare agencies that are looking to improve how their agency prioritizes and supports kinship caregivers?
Say, and we're still working on this. South Carolina is not perfect. Let me say that. We are far from perfect. I know I'm up here, cheerleading and acting like everything is just fabulous in South Carolina, and things are good. Things are going well, and we've made a lot of progress in the kinship world. But it's still one of our top initiatives. Like now, we are still plowing through and embedding that kin first culture. It does not happen overnight. It takes years to change the culture in your system, and the culture to the point where people don't know any other way to operate. But this is just the way that we do the work. This is the way we practice. Is thinking you're never thinking I'm going to place this child with a stranger. You're always thinking where am I going to find kin or fictive kin? How am I going to find the people who know this child, love this child, or connected to this child, so that I can reduce the amount of trauma the child experiences. I can keep that connectivity to their community and to the people that know and love them. And so we're not 100% there. But it is, again, it is work. We are, even right now as we speak, we just got done looking at policies, our policies. We've got several kinship policies, and we're like, okay, we got to look at this because we need to consolidate these. So we're sending the same clear message about, what we expect, and what the policies are around working with kinship families. And so I think that's one thing. So the culture shift has to happen because people have to believe in it and have to be champions of it. I'd say that's the other thing I would say is finding your champions in your local offices. Like, who are they? We had one particular county, it's one of our larger counties, who frankly had a lot of other challenges going on in it around the practice work. But in the kinship world, they were leading the entire state and have been for a long time. It was because the county director at that time pushed on and on down. Like, she embedded that, she was the champion, and she embedded that culture in her office. And so they don't know how to do the work any other way. So for them, this is natural. But for some of our other counties, it's not. So you really do have to, like, from the top down in your organization, you have to embed that culture, and you have to be the one to champion it. And the other thing I would say too is not always thinking about kinship caregivers as placement options, because sometimes kinship caregivers can't do placement, but they can support the child and who the child's placed with. It could be another kinship caregiver, and maybe you don't have a kinship caregiver. Maybe you exhausted all of the kinship options that you had, and you had to place with non-kin. But the next best thing is if there's a kinship support option that can help, share some of that responsibility with the non-kin provider to offer that support. Again, that connectivity is just as important and impactful in that child's life while they have to temporarily be out of their home.
Thank you for bringing that up. I think that is so important. And I love that mindset. It's a shift in mindset and culture. And I love how you point out finding your champions, but not only finding them, but also being them. So I think that's something that all of our audience can kind of take away with them, is that we can look for our champions, but even better so, we can be those champions within our spaces too. So, thank you, Dawn, again so much for having this conversation. We're sorry to not be able to have you here live with us, but I'm sure that all of our audience has appreciated everything that you have been able to bring to the table for us today.
Well, thank you for having me. And kinship care is near and dear to my heart. So it's for a lot of different reasons, but I feel very strongly about it. And so I consider myself one of those champions. And I do promise anybody watching this webinar, if you champion it, if you really, really do the work to change your culture, and you may have to start at the legislative, like looking at your policies and your statutes, and that's what we had to do. That's how we started, and then we just kept going from there. And so, and getting your community partners and your legislators in your state to champion it. Again, you got to have those champions. It's hard to move the work forward if you don't.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dawn.
Thank you.
Okay, so we do have a little bit of time here for some questions. I'm hearing that there might be some questions for Allie that maybe were in the chat or in the Q&A. Let me pull up. Let's see. So we've got a question here about the contact information for the Kinship Navigator program. So Allie, I'll throw that to you.
I think I can put it in the chat for foster kinship, and that will be me and our Deputy Director Leah Dodds, and all our model information is on our website. I've seen a couple of questions in the chat about a national kinship care, national navigator, and there is not a national navigation program, but there are a few programs in the federal clearinghouse that are evidence-based, and that just means that if a jurisdiction implements it with fidelity, they can draw down 4E funds for those services.
Another one for you, Allie, looks like, do you have strong outcomes for relatives and kinship caregivers that attend the opportunities for peer support? And if so, how do those promote these support group opportunities?
Yes. So the way our evaluation was done, which is if you want to get kind of nerdy about it. So like I said, we have information referral and support that is offered to everyone, and caregivers will take advantage of support. Some will join support groups. We have an online peer 24/7 group that families can join. We also do one-on-one emotional support and a whole bunch of family events. And then some families need case management for some of those other intense goals. The way our program was evaluated is as long as someone had a meaningful dosage of our program, and we define that as 60 minutes of the navigation services or more, which means they most likely participated at least in information and support. We got those outcomes that showed a decrease in placement disruptions and an increase in kinship licensing. So it's just important that whatever program is utilized has peer support and support groups for families embedded in sort of everything that they do, because families need that to build trust, and building trust gets these outcomes, which are the legal and financial stability outcomes.
Okay, I'm seeing questions coming in here. How can childcare be funded for kin caregivers? That's a huge barrier, sounds like in Ohio.
So, I mean, every state uses their child care subsidy differently. And I think it's important that, if there's categorical eligibility for children in foster care to receive child care subsidy, that we're just linking families to that as soon as possible. For states and systems that do a lot of what we call prevention work or even diversion from foster care, one of the things that's just important for families to know is if you're taking care of a child outside of the foster care system, what are those resources for you? And is it possible for you to do it with the available resources in your community? And just giving families accurate information is really important. For our navigation program in Nevada, we raise a lot of money privately to do respite care and provide free childcare for all of our families, for all of our services. But it's something you have to work on, by braided funding and really actively meeting the needs of families, because there's no obvious, easy funding stream for all of this. So it takes some work.
Looks like earlier there was a question about more recent research on the positive outcomes of kinship care. Allie, I'll let you speak on if the things that you
Yes,
might
I
have.
think Margarita shared a link to some of the more recent research that's available up on your website, and there's a lot. So research is ongoing in this, and it's getting better and better, really refining kinship family types as we look at these outcomes. And so the research often cited is 20 years old. I agree. I did my dissertation, finished in 2019, and used research from then. And there's been lots of research since. So I'm happy to share if someone wants to email me directly. And I'll put my contact information in the chat now.
Okay. And I did see that, I'm not sure if it was answered in the chat earlier, but I saw that there was maybe a question about the current percentage rates for kinship placements. And it looks like nationally, we're right around 35% right now on a national level, but that varies depending on state, tribe, and territory as well. Okay, there's a couple more here. Oh, and I did have Dawn also said that it was okay to share her information, so I'll make sure that that is included in the post-webinar email as well, so folks can reach out to her. has there been collaboration with federally recognized tribes and tribal courts in Nevada? And if so, what has that looked like?
Not in Nevada, but in Washington, they're exploring that. And in Minnesota, they're also exploring that more closely and finding a program that can adapt to those specific needs of the tribes. So those are two places to look. Foster Kinship is actually working with Minnesota. In addition to South Carolina and Utah, we're also going to start partnering with New York. So those, if you're in any of those spaces, we are going to be in your state soon.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I'm going to wrap us up here. It will let me. Oh, there we go. Okay. So hopeful that there are some key takeaways from our time together today when we are thinking about exploring, engaging, and prioritizing family members and fictive kin sooner as that first placement when kids are initially coming into care, and making sure that those kinship caregivers have the support that they truly need. And finding ways to partner with relatives and fictive kin using that effective customer service and authentic family engagement. And then remembering about the amazing work that is being done with this foster kinship navigator program, that it's evidence-based, it's supportive, and it's effective. And if you can, try to tap into it for your jurisdictions as well. I do want to point out our website. So if you go to diligentrecruitment.org, that's where you can find this webinar will be uploaded on here as well as sent out to everybody in the post-webinar email. If you go to the Knowledge Hub that you see at the top there, that's where you can find previously recorded webinars as well as other written resources and supports for diligent recruitment work. When I mentioned earlier that we have a technical assistance team that does on-site tailored capacity building and support for diligent recruitment work and planning, that is that technical assistance tab there. At the top, you can see where there's events, so that'll be where our future webinars will be listed there. And then if you go to the Learn from Your Peers, we have a peer group that we facilitate, and we actually are going to be having one that will be in December. Pamela, do you mind putting the date for our next peer group in the chat? That is also going to be talking about this same topic. So this is a great opportunity to come back and have some more of these conversations and ask some more of these questions and have the opportunity to network with your peers to hear how it's going in their states, tribes, and territories, and really talk through some more of these. It's December 11th for that. So if you're interested in that and aren't currently part of our peer group network, then go ahead and go to our website and click on that Learn from Your Peers, and that's how you can get into there. And that is what I have for you all today. So thank you all again for being here with us today in this shared space. Allie, thank you again for being here. It's always a pleasure. And shout out to Dawn, who I was able to chat with a couple of weeks ago but couldn't be with us here today, but still was able to help out with us. So I thank you all for the work that you are doing to support our kinship caregivers and go out and be those champions that we all can be.